I just learned some crazy news. Happy Monday, 24th of November of 2025. And it is another sunny day here in Israel, from where I come to you live to let you know about what's going on with some things, namely the war between Israel and Hamas in Gaza, and the current ceasefire that was put in place by the 20-point plan developed by the Trump administration and signed by Israel and Hamas, as well as the United States, the European Union, many individual European countries, even the UK, as well as Qatar and Turkey, Indonesia, and many Arab countries, Egypt. So there's a lot of people who, in theory, back the plan, yet in reality are doing exactly what I've been telling you guys all along that they would be doing with the plan, which is unfortunate, but it is a reality. And what they are doing with the plan, which again is something I've been telling you guys would be happening, is Hamas is testing the plan to see who will break first, who will stop supporting the plan first. And lo and behold, and I said it could be anyone of the signatories, chiefly among the main targets to break from its support were Qatar, Turkey, and Egypt, principally Qatar and Turkey, who would love to see the plan fail. And that's why when Hamas openly declared that they do not accept anything other than basically the exchange of hostages, and even that they haven't yet honored because there are still 3 bodies of dead hostages in Gaza, one of whom is not even Israeli, by the way, and not Jewish. He's Nepalese. Okay, right? When they said it openly, nobody flinched from the Qatar and Turkey side, and even Egypt. Egypt is holding direct negotiations right now with their intelligence agents debriefing Hamas in Cairo. Direct negotiations, direct talks. They're debriefing. They have an intelligence briefing happening right now today with Hamas leaders who are visiting Egypt to discuss the current plan and the status quo of the plan and what the likely next steps are to be handled or to be taken by Hamas. All in all, Hamas is giving the middle finger to Trump and the plan and to Israel. And so far, Israel has basically only responded to Hamas violations with very restrained attacks. Now, you might say, what are you talking about? Hamas killed one Israeli soldier. Israel responded by killing over 100 Palestinians. Well, you could say that, but Israel responded by attacking dozens of Palestinian terrorists who were, as usual, hiding among many civilians. And that is a consequence of war. When you violate a ceasefire, the war is back on. And the war has been on from really, it has been back on from day one of the ceasefire because Hamas has never really honored it for even an entire 24 hours. Yes, they returned the living hostages. Yes, they returned most of the dead hostages, but they have not released all of the hostages, returned all the hostages. Like I said, there's still 3 dead ones in Gaza. And they've attacked Israel on numerous occasions. And in fact, if you remember, for the past few weeks, I've been talking with you about these Hamas terrorists who have been trapped in tunnels inside the Israeli part of the Gaza Strip, where the IDF remains in control. And they refused to surrender, and they refused to put down their arms. and there was a lot of back and forth about what should happen. Should they be killed? Should they be arrested? Should they be let go? Israel was pressured by the United States and other countries to basically let them go. And Israel said, yeah, we're not going to do that. We're not just going to let a bunch of guys with guns in tunnels walk back into Gaza, into the part that they control, without any consequence, since we are during the ceasefire. And they could have been contacted by Hamas before the ceasefire went into effect and said, hey, get out of there, come back home. And they didn't. I mean, whether or not the leadership or contacted them or not is moot. They did not tell them to get out. In fact, Hamas leadership said that they absolutely reject the notion of having the Hamas gunmen terrorists surrender and give up their weapons. Well, guess what happened over the weekend, in case you weren't watching? Hello there. Careful talking about Israel. What do you mean, careful talking about Israel? Hamas terrorists, it's Ukrainian. I don't know what you mean. It's not the whole truth. You hold it open for the shower. What are you talking about? Many of the Hamas gunmen are still in the tunnels. But over the weekend, a number of them tried to escape the tunnels and tried to flee back to Gaza. They were eliminated. And a number of them were also arrested. But we're talking about 15 to 20 of them in total. It's not a very large number. There's still hundreds of them, allegedly, at least another 100 to 200 more. They only got about 15 or so of the 200 or so suspected terrorists that were stuck in the tunnel. So the vast majority of them, as far as we know, are still in the tunnels. What their condition is and all that, we don't actually know 100% because as great as Israeli technology can be, it's still not able to fully see, allegedly, through the thick walls of the tunnels, with photographic imagery, unless they actually put cameras in there in some way. We can tell certain things. We can detect, you can detect heartbeats through great walls and things like that, so you can actually count certain things, but we don't necessarily know every single person that's in there. What we do know is the only people that are in there are terrorists. There is literally no other reason for armed Hamas, for people of any kind to be in those tunnels unless they are terrorists, right? There's no, since Hamas says there's only 3 dead hostages remaining to be returned, and Israel says there's only 3 dead hostages remaining to be returned. Well, that means that the best estimate that we have is there are no Israeli hostages in those tunnels where those terrorists happen to be trapped. So the only people, and we know Hamas does not allow non-combatant Gazans into the tunnels. They only allow Hamas people into the tunnels, which means there's nobody in them except Hamas people, and therefore, hey, they are fair game in this war, and either they surrender or they be ended. That's how it goes. What's it say? Americans thinking the world revolves around them. I don't know what you're talking about. There's no reason for Israelis to be in Gaza either. No, there is a reason for Israel to be in Gaza. It's to get rid of Hamas, which, by the way, Hamas has agreed to end its rule. They've agreed to give up power. They've agreed to step away from the political stage. That's what happened when they signed onto the plan. But ever since doing that, they've said they no longer support the thing they just signed. Once again, a case of Hamas lying through their teeth. You can't say that anything. Well, you can't say anything if you don't know full story. I don't know what you mean by that. Hey, how are you, Quaps Katan or Quaps Quatch? How are you? Shalom Israel. Let's see a message here that got. What's this? Make love, not war. Yeah, why did that get held for review? Sure. Make love, not war. I'm all for that. Nice hippy dippy saying, and it's true. We should be making love and not war, or we should be spreading love and not war. We should be, standing up for humanity and not for killing each other. But the unfortunate truth is, here in Israel, we're surrounded by some pretty nasty people. And in Gaza, that's one of those places where we sometimes have no choice but to fight to defend ourselves against crazy, extremely violent people that are often mislabeled as radical Islamists. The thing is, they're not radical Islamists at all. Unfortunately, they are very literal Islamists. Like, they firmly believe in annihilating the Jewish people and the Jewish state. Like, that's I mean, it's in their charter. If you've never read it, I highly recommend you go read it. And if you tell me they changed their charter, yeah, go read it again. Tell me how it's changed. Go ahead. I'm waiting for you. Oh, they took out the part about killing all the Jews around the world? No, not really. It's still in there. You just aren't reading it right. But sure, you can say that they modified their charter, but they still talk about destroying Israel and killing every Israeli. So no, they haven't. They haven't, in fact, changed it really. But you can accept their claim that it's changed. Okay, they still want to annihilate this country. Therefore, Israel has the right to defend itself against them, because they are openly an enemy of the state of Israel, who actively take measures against the state of Israel. So, yeah, Israel has the right to destroy Hamas, because that's how war goes. And the fact that people who are supportive of Hamas are butthurt that Hamas has lost this war, and they can't accept it and they can't admit it because they're cowards, they have no honor, that's just, a fact of reality. If Hamas had the ability to do to Israel what people say Israel is doing to the Gazans, Hamas would actually kill every single Israeli. They're quite open about that, as opposed to Israel, which does not kill every single Gazan. Now, Trump, as I mentioned at the top of this video, has been playing both sides because of his interests in doing more business with Saudi Arabia and Qatar and Emirates states in general across the Gulf region. Here we go. Not just Israelis, but all whatever. No one should support Hamas. Yeah, definitely no one should support Hamas, for sure. What do you think about war jump-starting the economy? If we had a worldwide collapse, would this be the only solution? So war is often blamed for many things and is often accused of being a way to jumpstart an economy. You have to know reality. Yeah, I do know reality, bro. I write about this topic a lot. I publish books about this topic. I published literally an encyclopedia. I was one of the co-authors of the Encyclopedia of the Arab-Israel Conflict from 1948 until the Declaration of Principles in 1983. It was published by Greenwood Press. The lead author was Professor Bernard Reich, and I was one of the many contributing co-authors. Not many, but one of the contributing co-authors. You can look it up. You'll see my name there. So, again, war has often been used as a sort of verbal device in intellectual arguments to say, oh, these wars all happen because the military-industrial complex just wants to make more money. No. I mean, yes and no, but no overall. In the sense that, sure, does the military-industrial complex make more money when there's war? Of course they do. But guess what? They also make a lot of money when there's no war. They sell defensive weapons, they sell preventative devices, they sell offensive weapons, even during peacetime. And if you look at the overall comparison, for example, of the military-industrial complex versus the diaper industry, there's a lot more diaper money in the world than there is guns and weapons, right? It's a fact. Diapers and soap, right? Sanitary devices, diapers, soap, tampons, pads, those kind of things, hygiene products. A lot more money in that. I know it may not seem right, because you're like, well, these missiles are like $1 million each. Yeah, but you sell a lot more diapers than you do, weapons. As much as it's true that there's definitely, a lot of money in the weapons industry, and there is, it's undeniable, it is a fraction of the economy. If you actually look at the overall size of the US economy, for example, or even the Israeli economy, Israel, by the way, is like the fourth largest exporter of weapons in the world, and yet our military industry is not the overall industry in Israel. It's not the leading industry in Israel. Does it make a lot of money for Israel? Sure, of course it does. It's the fourth largest exporter of weapons in the world. Of course they make a lot. Of course we make a lot of money from our weapons industry, but it's not the largest industry in Israel. It's not the largest industry in the UK. It's not the largest industry in France. Mm-hmm. Uh, Peace, man. Indeed, peace, man. Fine weather. I agree with you. Peace. Peace is the way. Peace and love. Islam has always been in opposition to Israel. Well, yes, Israel. Well, no, Islam is actually Zionist if you actually read the Quran literally, because it mentions Bnei Israel more than 43 times, and it says specifically, like Allah says specifically in the Bible, for the people of Bnei Israel, which are obviously the Jews, the people of Israel, the children of Israel, to go to live and in their homeland. It's very clear about that. So Allah is a Zionist, if you want to look at it that way. Okay. But the fact is, Muslims who have interpreted Islam, many of them have been in opposition to Israel and Jews having their own nation since the time of Muhammad, but they are not interpreting, if you will, the literal text correctly. At least not in my opinion, because literally Allah says to the people of Israel to go inhabit their holy land, right? So that is not a true statement entirely what you said, although I understand the meaning of what you meant. You probably mean something like the extremists who interpret the Quran a specific way have long been opposed to Israel. Sure, that's true. Anyway, this video is about Trump playing both sides and why he's doing it. So he's doing it obviously because he is interested in advancing his peace plan. He's interested in winning a Nobel Prize. He's interested in doing more deals with Saudi Arabia and Qatar and the UAE and Oman and Bahrain, et cetera, et cetera. He's interested because he ultimately also wants to sell more weapons, including F-35s, not just to Saudi Arabia and AI chips to Saudi Arabia, but he also wants to sell a lot more F-35s to Turkey than the amount that Saudi Arabia may get. And he can do it if he gets Saudi Arabia, if he gets permission to sell Saudi Arabia these weapons, or if he gives permission for Saudi Arabia to buy these weapons, because Saudi Arabia is not even a NATO member. So once you sold them to a non-NATO member that is hostile on paper towards Israel, even though we know Saudi Arabia is not really hostile towards Israel right now, but once you've given permission to Saudi Arabia, a non-NATO member of the world community, it's a lot easier to justify, well, we can sell them to a NATO member like Turkey, even though Turkey is not exactly a great member of NATO right now. And people will say, but the version that they're selling to Turkey and to Saudi Arabia is nothing like the updated version, and the Israeli version is better because it has Israeli avionics, etc. The answer is for now, right? Those things are true for now, but they may not be true in the future. It may be at some point that the Israelis will not have a significant qualitative edge over those other countries' versions, and that would be potentially devastating for Israel. Now you can say, well, but Turkey's not likely to attack Israel. Maybe not for now, but that doesn't mean in 5 or 10 years they won't be. People do crazy things. People thought, what are you talking about? Vladimir Putin is going to invade Crimea. Why would he do such a thing? That would be crazy. You'd have the entire world against him. Well, he did it. And then people thought, well, that's all he's going to take. He's not going to take the rest of Ukraine. He's not going to try to take the rest of Ukraine. That would be totally crazy. Sure enough, he's doing it since 2022. He went and did it. And the world, as much as it has defended Ukraine, has not come together to actually defeat Russia. They're stopping Russia from taking much more land, but Russia still continues to grind away because it continues to sacrifice. Putin continues to sacrifice lots of men. He does not care how many soldiers die. He's got a massive amount of soldiers that he can pull into action. Even if they're not soldiers today, they'll be soldiers tomorrow as soon as he needs them. And he doesn't care how many of them die. He wants to reestablish Russia as an empire. And the point is, crazy things happen because people do crazy things, even that seem completely irrational. Like, why would Putin suddenly care about reestablishing the Russian Empire? Right? Well, because that's what he wants to leave as his legacy. He wants to be seen as a guy who went out with a bigger Russia than it was when he came into power. To him, that's a victory, even though he's completely destabilizing a very key country. Right? Both Russia and Ukraine are being destabilized by this war, whether you agree with it or not. The fact is, the war in Russia and Ukraine is destabilizing both of those countries. It's harming both of their economies significantly. Yes, Ukraine is very resilient and has done a lot of amazing, innovating things during this war, and they've actually created their own, more than a cottage industry at this point, it's an industry of drone manufacturing and combat, strategies and tactics. They've developed a whole lot of things that they did not have 4 or 5 years ago, out of necessity and being forced to improvise, much in the same way, by the way, that Israel has had to do over the past 77 years as a country, and even before that, when the Jews were establishing various defense forces to protect themselves here in the land of Israel, before there was actually a state reestablished in the name of Israel. So, right, it just goes to show that sometimes necessity, in fact, very often, necessity is, in fact, the mother of invention. Amazing dogs here walking around. Islam has always been in opposition to Israel. Islam has always been peaceful. What are you kidding? That's very funny. No, Islam has not always been peaceful. Not at all. Islam is a warring, conquesting religion. You can be a believer or whatever of it, whatever. As long as you're peaceful, that's great. But the fact is, Islam is not a religion of peace. Not at all. It is a religion of conquest. That doesn't mean I hate Islam or hate Muslims. But there's a lot of stuff in Islam that I do not agree with. I'm not a believer of Islam, that's for sure. Of the Quran. Now, technically, you want to say, well, do you submit to God? Because that's what Islam means. Well, or surrender to God. Well, that's a personal question and is irrelevant to my political views on the subject. But anybody who surrenders to God, basically who submits to the sort of the Lord of the universe, is Islamic, right? In that definition. But it doesn't mean you are a Muslim, even though to be a Muslim means you surrender to God. But the common interpretations of those words are obviously talking about a very specific religion and a very specific form of adhering to that religion. Right? Now, yes, there are many different ways that people submit in that religion, because there are obviously many different types of Muslims. But let's not get it twisted. There are clear definitions for these words, and then there are also clear, obvious meanings for these words, right? Basically saying Islam and Muslim, that culture is trying to basically appropriate every other religion, which is why Muslims will often say things like, Jesus was a Muslim, Moses was a Muslim, Abraham was a Muslim. It's like, okay, so I guess T-Rex was a Muslim if T-Rex believed in God. It's utter nonsense. But that's because that's a way for Muslims to try to culturally appropriate other religions and pretend and believe, as they spread lies and misinformation to each other, that theirs is the only religion, which is just a very arrogant, conceited, audacious claim to make in a world filled with many thousands of religions, right? And literally millions of gods. If you just look at the Hindu culture alone, they have God knows how many gods, many, many, many gods. So it's a common misnomer. Okay. Okay. You want to go for the Australian Air Force? Good. Well, good for you. Good luck with that. Islam peaceful. Okay. Israel is our greatest blackmailing ally. Our greatest blackmailing ally? I don't know what you mean. Best ally we have. Israel is a great ally of the United States and of the West. Israel is literally a bastion of freedom on the west coast of the Middle East, and we've been warning the rest of the world about the dangers of violent Islamists for decades. And people in the West are starting to wake up to the reality of what is happening with the violent extremists who claim to be Muslims and who do terrorist attacks often and systematically in the name of their God, in the name of Islam, in the name of Allah. You know, the best Adreno God, dude, come on, really? You gotta be. Tyrone Washington, you are a conspiracy theorist. Enjoy it. I mean, you're just wrong, but okay. You're wrong about that. I mean, if you believe the adrenochrome trope, I don't know what to tell you. You are definitely, um, you're literally believing a blood libel against the Jewish people. And that is an ancient anti-Semitic trope that dates back a long time to the Middle Ages when we were accused of, killing Christian babies to drink their blood or to eat their blood as part of our matzah. It's just absolutely nuts that anybody would believe something like that. But hey, if you want to, you can believe it all you want, I guess. It just proves you are not being intellectually honest or you are misinformed. Would it be okay if I asked for your pronouns? Beer and wine. He, him, whatever you want to say. I'm a dude. I'm not something else in the HGTV world. If you want to be something else, go for it. I have nothing but respect for your choices to label yourself however you want. But I view gender as one thing and biological sex as another. What you are, these are very different things. When you read the Bible, the Jews try to convince the Christians, but the Bible does not refer to modern Israel. What are you talking about? Which Bible? When you read the Bible, when I read the Bible, I read the 5 books of Moses. I read the Tanakh, the Torah, right? There's no mention of Christians in there because Christians didn't exist, right? Jesus was a Jew, born and raised and died a Jew, was called the King of the Jews by the Romans who killed him, and he was a rabbi on top of everything else. And he was rebuked by many other rabbis, but not all, and many other Jews, but not all. But he was born and lived and died a Jew. He wasn't a Christian. The Christians are the ones who followed him. They're the ones who called themselves Christians. And not at first, by the way. The very first people that followed him, they were Jews. They were just Jews who were derivating from mainstream Judaism. That's all. And the Christian Bible, if you want to call it that, or as it's often called, the New Testament, does mention Israel many times as, for example, the place where Jesus was born and lived and died. Right? It mentions specifically Bethlehem. It mentions specifically Nazareth. It mentions specifically Tiberias. It mentions specifically many places in Israel. So yes, Israel is absolutely mentioned in the Bible. Of course, it doesn't mention the modern state of Israel because there was a state when Jesus was alive. There was a Jewish state, a Jewish kingdom when Jesus was alive. He lived in it. Right? Jesus was born in Judea. And on top of that, he lived his entire life here during a time when, yes, there was a Jewish state with Romans occupying it, right? So to the Romans managed to occupy this state for a while, and then about 80 years or so, 79 years, or no, less, about 40 years, sorry, after Jesus was killed by the Romans, when he was crucified by the Romans, then the Romans destroyed the Second Temple and kicked out most of the Jews from this land, sold them into slavery, spread them around the world, in Europe and many other places. Many of them went to Asia, many of them went to North Africa, many of them went to other parts of the world, spread around the world over time, over centuries. Eventually we made our homeland again after about 1800, almost 1900 years or so. So yeah, it's I don't know what you're getting at with the Jews in the Christian Bible, or Israel isn't. It definitely is. But of course, it doesn't mention modern Israel because there was no need to mention modern Israel since that wasn't the thing. It's a silly comment to make, to be honest. But maybe you just don't know. That's the deception. There's no deception. Advancing peace plan. I thought he just remained the Defense to Ministry of War. Who renamed? Yeah, Trump did rename the Department of Defense to the Department of War, because obviously Trump loves media stuff and one-liners and all this kind of crap, right? I don't really see any issue with that. If you know anything about Trump, you know he loves to play up the media. Like, the media is his best friend. As much as he calls them out and calls them names and insults them and does all this kind of Trumpian stuff that he loves to do, calling people and terrible journalists and working for fake news and all this kind of stuff. At heart, Trump is absolutely a media maven. He loves the media. He cannot get enough of the media. In fact, so much so that in the 80s, right, when he was just a real estate developer, he would fake calls to the media to pretend that he was a billionaire or whatever. And he would do it with a fake personality that he created, with the name Barron, which is kind of an interesting tell that he later named one of his children Barron Trump. But he absolutely loves to play up the media. And if you think he doesn't, I highly recommend you learn about Trump some more, because the guy absolutely is a media monster, or animal beast, whatever you want to call it. He knows very well how to play up the media. That's one thing you can say about the guy, whether you like him or not, right? Doesn't matter. You can be his biggest fan or his biggest detractor. You have to admit the guy knows how to play up the media. Like, there's no going around that fact or getting around that fact. He's absolutely into that. What else is the other question here? Advancing the peace plan. Yeah, exactly. Renamed. Okay. Israel, the corporate. I don't know what you mean, Israel, the corporate. Israel, like any other country, is incorporated in that sense as a corporate body of people, right? It is a corporate being, yes, if you know what that means, right? It's not just a business. Thank you. I mean, business matters like anywhere else, but not just a business. Saudi is hostile to Israel on paper. What paper is that? Saudi Arabia is hostile on paper to Israel because Israel and Saudi Arabia are still technically enemies. Saudi Arabia and Israel are still technically at war. That's what I mean by on paper. On paper, Saudi Arabia has not signed a peace deal with Israel, which means technically Israel and Saudi Arabia are still enemies. Right? There's a reason Jews from Israel cannot freely travel to Saudi Arabia. Jews from other countries can, not all the time and not very easily, but they can. There are even expats who live in Saudi Arabia who are Jewish. That's a fact. I mean, I know people are Saudi who work with Jewish expats from the US and from other countries, the UK, etc. They work in big, for example, big tech companies, etc. And yes, they absolutely work with Jewish people who live and work in Saudi Arabia, and they have a fairly good life, etc. They're enjoying the fruits of living in Saudi Arabia as expats. But that said, they are in a little bit of a risk, more than the average, let's say, Jew living in Israel, because technically speaking, Saudi Arabia still is not at peace with Israel, and it is, after all, the home of Wahhabi Islam, which is one of the key organizations and key derivatives of Islam that spread modern terrorism. So Saudi Arabia is a very complex place, and currently the reigning king and his son would very much like to have peace with Israel, allegedly, from what they've said publicly and openly. But they want, obviously, to be either an actual peace or recognition of the state of Palestine by Israel, or a plan towards it that is realistic, achievable, and that is actually supported by the actions of the Israeli government as well as the Palestinians. So that's what I mean by they're technically enemies, or on paper. What is Trump doing? Trump is playing both sides, because that's what Trump does. He's a transactional president. I've always said that. If you know anything about my videos, you should know when I talk about politics and Trump, I've always said Trump is a transactional guy. Like 100%. He is not a deeply ideological person. But that said, he has always been able to understand the big picture. Even if he doesn't necessarily know all the nuance and the details, he's actually shown himself, and continues to show himself, to understand the big picture and the importance of the big picture of what is right and what is wrong. But again, a lot of that he puts to the side when it comes to, I can make a deal and make money for my country or myself. He is extremely, you can say narcissistic if you want, but I will say just he's extremely normal. I know you can say, what are you talking about? He's extremely normal as a politician who likes to do deals, who likes to pocket money. Right? That is par for the course for politics, which is why I don't hate the guy. Right? I never hated the guy. He's just a politician. He's doing politician stuff. And you can disagree with me. You can tell me I'm wrong all you want. But prove me wrong. Right? There's a big difference between telling me I'm wrong and actually proving me wrong. Right? Beautiful dog. It's amazing. It's like a Malinois, very large Malinois. What is this? Jesus. I found all kinds of crazy samples for the lab here. It's absolutely nuts. So Trump is definitely a transactional person, and definitely can do things against people and groups that you think he might be supportive of. For example, what did he do this past weekend? Right? He literally stood there on Thursday with a group of Israelis who have been held hostages, some of them for 2 years, until they were released finally, and declared his support for them and called them heroes, etc. Gave them all coins, to commemorate the event. And then he also, the very next day, met with Mamdani, the incoming mayor of New York, who stood there right next to Trump, as Trump was sat at the Oval Office desk, the Resolute desk. And Mamdani literally said, I have said before that Israel is committing a genocide. And political as he is, Trump just sat there and didn't push back on that in that moment, right? Which is definitely something that some people would do, and past presidents would have done. You can detract, for example, Biden all you want, but Biden would have said, very likely, because he did publicly rebuke the accusation that Israel was committing a genocide. Trump really hasn't, and when he's had the opportunity to do it literally in front of the world media at the Resolute desk with an avowed Hamas terrorist supporter, a guy who co-founded a Hamas terrorist supporting organization in college where he went, a guy who openly lobbied the Hamas supporters for their votes during his election campaign to be mayor of the city with the single largest Jewish population outside of any Israeli city, specifically Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. So yeah, Trump is hypocritical in that sense. But again, he's just a politician doing politician stuff. So I'm not surprised by that. And overall, he's still a very big supporter of Israel. Anybody who denies that is denying reality. Okay? Yes, he plays both sides of the fence. Yes, he's transactional. Yes, he's doing things which may or may not be be helpful to Israel. But he's doing things as an American president, because he is the president of the United States. He's doing things that he believes are in the interests of America first, which you would expect from any president of the United States to do, whether you agree with their policy or not, whether you think it's in America's policy or not, policy interest or not. That he's doing what he believes, and he is currently the chief executive of the United States, so he gets to make that decision currently. Let's see. He is building super ugly. His building is super ugly and wasn't planned nicely like the surrounding ones. Which building? He has many buildings. You mean Trump Tower, or you mean something else? This crack wishes he was a black superior king. Who wishes? What are you talking about? Who wishes he was a black superior? What are you even talking about? The Jews try to blame the unaliving of Jesus on the Romans. LOL. The Vatican has said that the Romans killed Jesus, not the Jews. And unless you are one of the crackpot, crazy Christians who believes, the things that people like Candace Owens and her husband believe, if you are somebody who is Catholic, then if you don't follow the ruling of the Vatican Council on that, technically you're a heretic, because you go against the church and its declarations. And its declarations very openly since the 1960s are that Jews did not kill Jesus. Also, history shows that Jews did not kill Jesus, because who crucified him? Who put him on the cross? Who drove the nails into his arms? Have you ever seen a depiction of Jews actually doing it in any historically valid context? There's absolutely no evidence that Jews crucified Jesus. Sorry, if you believe that, you don't know history. And you really should learn a thing or two about history. Why unalive JFK? The Romans did that too? What? Lee Harvey Oswald killed JFK Jr., if you don't know that. Or JFK, if you don't know that, go learn some things about history. And Jack Ruby killed Lee Harvey Oswald. And if you can tell me Jack Ruby was a Mossad agent or Lee Harvey Oswald was a Mossad agent, I mean, you're completely crazy. And if you can tell me, well, they did it because Jack Kennedy didn't offer enough support to Israel. Jack Kennedy offered the support to Israel that was necessary at the time. And he's actually the first American president in 1961 who sold Israel military weapons. He sold Israel the Skyhawk. That was the first American arms deal to Israel. It wasn't a massively significant deal in terms of number or size, but it opened the door towards future American investment in Israeli arms, and basically created the formula that we still have today. Obviously has evolved significantly since then, but it's essentially the same concept, just over more years, more time. So yeah, absolutely, Kennedy was a friend of Israel, and saying that Israel killed him is about as insane as saying that Israel killed Charlie Kirk. And if that's what you were saying that to get at, well, I beat you to it. Israel did not kill Charlie Kirk. Charlie Kirk was a great friend of Israel. Why would we kill our great friend? I mean, even suggesting that is insane, but okay, if you want to make that claim, well, bring on your crazy ideas. The marketplace of ideas is a great place for for everybody to suss out what's real and what's nonsense, right? What's good and what's bad information. Let me guess, the Romans also did 9/11. You keep saying nonsensical things. Al-Qaeda did 9/11. If you know anything about that, 15 out of the 19 hijackers were Saudi Arabians. But Al-Qaeda was the organization that planned and carried out the attacks of 9/11. By the way, I literally told the government of the United States that an attack like that would happen years before it happened, because there was already an Al-Qaeda attack on the World Trade Center in 1993. There was a World Trade Center bombing when a car bomb was exploded in the basement of the World Trade Center in a parking lot underground. If you don't know anything about that, well, go learn a thing or two, like I said. And yes, I literally did inform people at the very highest levels of American intelligence, etc., back in the day, in around 1996, that the WTC would be a target again, and that the internet would suffer temporary significant outages because about 20% of all internet traffic at the time was routed through the World Trade Center's AT&T facility. If you don't know about that, go learn about it. These are facts that you really cannot challenge because they just are. They're objective and measurable. Can you tell the viewers how much you love Jesus? Hey, man, you know what? I'm 100% Jewish, and my view on Jesus is, dude, I don't have to be a Christian to still appreciate a good book. I don't have to be Christian to appreciate that Jesus taught some lessons in that book. Whether I believe in Jesus or not as a person that ever even existed is irrelevant, because billions of people believe he did exist. And it also doesn't matter to me if he existed or not, because the stories in the book and the lessons he imparted are still the same stories in the book. And some of those stories I think are not great lessons. Some of the words I think are not great lessons. Some of the words I think are great lessons. Like, for example, peace and love, showing kindness to the poor, the meek, turning the other cheek the first time, not the second and third and fourth and fifth time. All right? Not you get one chance. You want to do something, I'll turn the other cheek the first time, but that's it. You don't have a second warning if you're attacking me, right? But I also believe more in the Jewish tenet of, if someone rises to strike you, and you can rise first to strike them down, you should. Because why should you be attacked? If you know somebody's going to attack you, stop them from doing it if you can. That's literally what preemptive strikes are. And they're perfectly allowed and legitimate in pretty much every convention of war. Why? Because, well, it's logical. Why would anybody want to allow someone to attack them first before attacking back, especially when we're talking about like nations at war, right? Nations at war are similar to, but vastly different than an individual in a fight. Yes, you can say, well, it's just a larger scale. Sure. But there's much more impact of a nation being at war than an individual in a fight, because it's a larger scale. Can you tell? Okay, so how much do I love Jesus? I mean, I told you that already. I said some of the stories are great. Some of the stories I don't really support so much. But overall, good intellectual stimulation, certainly it is. It makes great debates and conversations. And the thing is, Christianity, like Judaism, has undergone a reform or reinterpretation on multiple occasions to bring up to date, if you will, to keep their holy scriptures relevant to today's times, right? Islam, unfortunately, has not. There's the Quran. There are the initial interpretations of it, which were not reforming it. They were just literally about 8,000 different stories trying to explain what was in the Quran, and a smaller number of them were selected and were basically edited down into the current hadiths, and even those are not fully agreed upon. If you look at what the main, for example, transcriber of the hadiths were, and he said that most of the hadiths that were submitted essentially, and were collected were not includable because they were just too fanciful. They were not realistic. They could not possibly be included in any authoritative explanation of what the hadiths purport to explain. Um, but again, that said, yeah, there's always a that said in this case. Anyway, I'll move back towards the political side there. Let's okay. So you dared me to do something that I did. I explained to you what I thought of Jesus. And there are some things that Jesus spoke about in that book that I love. Yeah, I love the idea of spreading love and peace and love. He was a hippie, man. He was one of the earliest hippies. Walked around barefoot here in the Holy Land with a long hair and beard, wearing flowers and beads for a necklace and, rags for clothes, and walked around either barefoot or sandals, spreading peace and love. How is that? How is he not a hippie? I'm all for that. But he wasn't a radical leftist hippie, although he certainly was liberal compared to the conservative mainstream of Judaism, or the orthodoxy of Judaism at the time, if you want to call it that. But he would not have identified as a radical left-winger today. A liberal, maybe, yeah, sure. But there were certainly some things he said which were quite conservative, like his views on family, physical relations, intimacy, etc. Right? Those are slightly more conservative. But he wasn't some crazy radical in that sense either. He wasn't an extreme person necessarily for the time. Are there things he said which today can be considered or interpreted as extreme? Yeah, there are. But for the most part, I don't think he was that extremist at all. I think he was just a hippy-dippy Jew, happy dude who had some pretty open-minded views about Judaism. The Greater Israel. Yeah, there is no Greater Israel theory. Okay, that's a trope set against Israelis who try to attack Jews and claim that we want to make Israel conquer the world or significant parts of it. No, we don't. We're a country of less than 10 million people. We can barely contain our own borders and secure our own borders. The last thing we need is to expand our country and take over all of Jordan, for example, or whatever. Right? We don't need that. Thank you. We don't need to conquer Syria. It's not in our interest to do that. We just want to leave those lands as their own and live in our own compact state and have it be secure. Okay. Now, are there people who want to take over the West Bank and or Gaza? Yeah, of course there's some people. We have a democracy here. People are free to have their own opinions. That's the beauty of freedom of expression. That's the beauty of the marketplace of ideas. You can say your crazy thing, and the rest of the people can say, well, that's an interesting thing. Thanks for sharing your opinion. That's crazy. We're not doing it. And that's currently the zeitgeist of the views of Israel taking over Gaza and kicking out all the people that live there, or just taking it over and making it an Israeli outpost, or annexing all the land or whatever. I've put forth the plan that Israel should annex the land in Gaza that is not occupied, right, which has been emptied out by the IDF. I've said that because that way Israel doesn't have to give citizenship to anybody on empty land, and we'd have more land to control to keep the Hamas in check. Because you can say, well, Hamas has agreed to surrender, but they haven't done it yet. So there's literally no reason for Israel at this point not to literally annex the 50% of Gaza that they control, and they should eliminate the Hamas. And until they do, we should definitely be annexing that land. I have no problem with that. And in the West Bank, right, Judea, Samaria, look, that is literally the ancient historical homeland of the Jews. But Israel has long accepted the fact, rightly or wrongly, government after government in Israel has long accepted the fact that that land is occupied now by people who are Arabs mostly, and who call themselves Palestinian since the 1970s. Before that, they didn't. They just called themselves Arabs. And they still call themselves Arabs. And they're really mostly not Arabs, by the way. They're Arabized Levantines. But that's another issue. What's your thoughts on India? I love India. I think India is great. Trump is a hooker? What an idiotic thing to say. Let me get into some shade here where I can read your lovely comments. What does this say? Not talking about the black apostate racist Jews. What are you talking about? Okay. Bastion of freedom. Yeah, literally, Israel is a bastion of freedom compared to all the countries around it. Absolutely. We have a democracy here. We vote for our leaders. Everyone who is a citizen over the age of 18 has the right to vote, whether they're Jewish, Muslim, Christian, Arab, you know, agnostic, Zoroastrian, Zen Buddhist. It doesn't matter. If you're an Israeli, you get to vote. And there are millions of people in Israel who hold that citizenship, who have vastly different views. There are literally Arab political parties in the Knesset, which is the Israeli parliament, and they very often hold extremely anti-Israel views, and they sit in our government. And many people would say they shouldn't even be allowed to do that, and yet they are allowed to do that. Right? Many people say, well, if you're not a patriot, you shouldn't be allowed to sit in the government. Well, democracy says otherwise. At least our democracy does. We say if you are a citizen, you get to vote, and you get to you vote for whatever party is running. And if you want to create a party, even if it is against the state, if you do it in a legal process, you have the right to do that. Just like in America, right? People who are anti-American still can vote, and they can vote for anti-American political parties. They can vote for the Communist Party, for example. Right? There's people who vote for the Communist Party. It's in America, which is sound counterintuitive and stupid and crazy, but that's the beauty of a democracy and an open marketplace of ideas. People who can't internalize that have a short circuit in their brain. I understand you want everybody to be patriotic if you love your country and this and that and whatever. But Mark Twain put it very well when he said patriotism is basically a refuge for the non-intellectual people. And in many ways he's right. Although patriotism does matter, and it's a wonderful thing in many cases, especially when you're fighting a war to survive, literally, as a nation. On the other hand, patriotism is often used or misused by people who are weak intellectually, and they just stand behind this notion of patriotism to kind of use it as a stick to beat against their arguments, or against the point coming at them against their arguments. So yeah, patriotism I think is actually a good thing overall in a good country, but patriotism is very often, all too often, abused by the state itself and used as a tool to manipulate people who don't have a better argument. I like that I am a Muslim, but I can't do that I believe. But I don't do that I believe in God, but I don't pray to Him. Okay, well, congratulations on liking that you are a Muslim. Well, I not like that I am a Muslim. You don't like that you are a Muslim? Okay, well then, don't be a Muslim. Congratulations on not liking that you're a Muslim. Now, Jesus died and was born again. Okay. Witnessed by over 500 people. No, it's the book says 500 people saw it, but there's no actual historical account of that. There's just some writing in the Bible, which is, you cannot use a book to prove the book. You need other documents or other records, material or otherwise, to demonstrate that. And there is no other material that is physical that demonstrates that. We don't have any actual record of that. But does it mean it didn't happen? Maybe it did happen. Maybe it didn't happen. But there's no way to prove it. So you can believe it, and that's what you should say. You can say you believe it. Nothing wrong with that. Yes, people, what's happening? Hey, just talking here. Romans killed Jesus by crucifixion, but the Jews wanted him dead and pushed the Romans to. Again, you can believe that the Jews wanted him dead because of what it says in the Bible and how you interpret it, but that doesn't necessarily make it so. Just because, even if a group of Jews wanted him dead, that does not mean the majority of Jews want him dead. Guess why? Because most Jews had no idea who Jesus was. Okay, we didn't have cell phones back then. We didn't have smartphones. We didn't have computers and the internet, right? Word didn't travel around all of Israel about this man calling himself Jesus. Now, you can believe that it did. That's a very Christian belief, and God bless you for having that belief. I have no problem with that. But from my perspective, he was just another kind of kooky Jew who went to the Temple Mount and said some pretty radical things and did some pretty radical stuff compared to what many other traditional rabbis did. Again, that doesn't mean I dislike Jesus or Christians at all. I don't. In fact, I would even say that Jews and Christians have a lot in common. than a lot more in common than we have that differentiates us. Right? We both share the Bible, right? We both believe in the same 5 books of Moses, right? Both believe, we both believe in the Torah. So what else is there to say about that? We obviously share a lot in common. Yes, there's been a lot of division. Yes, there's been a lot of fighting between Christians and Jews. Yes, there's been a lot of slaughter of Jews by Christians over the eons. Absolutely. But ultimately, we do have more in common than we have that divides us. It's just a matter of appreciating that and coming to terms with the fact that what has happened, and we can't change the past, but we can decide our future by making actions in the present. So, I'm not a hater. Sorry, not gonna feed your trolling. If it was trolling, I don't think it was, but maybe. Jews' eyes have been blinded. Oh, here we go. For a time, from the understanding due to Jesus Christ. Okay, well, that's your belief. Good for you. We Jews don't believe that Jesus was a prophet. We don't believe that he was the Messiah. So, to us, you're free to believe that. As long as you keep it peaceful, God bless you. I have no problem with that. Believe what you want. I know a lot of evangelists also feel similar to what you think, and that's fine. I love evangelists. I have no problem with them. I love that they come to Israel and support Israel here and from far away. God bless them. They're wonderful people. The fact that they believe that there's going to be an Armageddon and the Jews will all become Christians, or die or whatever. Okay, that's what they believe. We don't even believe in hell, so we're not going to hell that they believe we are going to, because we don't believe in hell. But as long as we are all peaceful and living together, and you can pray for that day to come, for doomsday or whatever, Armageddon to come. From my point of view, it ain't happening. Okay, this is not a thing to me and to Jews in general, because it's not in our religion. But you want to believe it, God bless you. I have no problem with that. Jews also make. Who wrote Hi Dad? That's okay. Jews also make Roman Empire fails. Sure, we made the Roman Empire fall. No, the Visigoths and the Ostrogoths made the Roman Empire fall. And you're an idiot. The verdict doesn't make the rules dumb. F. I don't know why you're saying that, Dave, but okay. Are you Jew? Tell me. Am I Jew? Am I Jewish? Yes, I'm Jewish. I am a Jew. Are you Jew? Learn English, or learn how to not say things in a hateful way. But yeah. Okay. Sure, yeah, Jews killed JFK for what he was saying, whatever you want to believe. Again, you want to believe nonsensical crackpot conspiracy theories, the beauty of democracy and free speech, you get to say crazy things like that, and I get to mock you for it. Show me any evidence that happened. Go ahead. Give us some proof. You claimed it. You made the claim, now prove it. I know you can't, but hey, there you go. You made a claim, back it up. Hey. Akita was formed by the CIA. Okay. You mean Israel, not Jews? This guy just a boomer, or he is a Jew? What? I don't think you even know what a boomer is, okay? Boomer is a term for baby boomers. Baby boomers were people born in the 20-year period after World War II. So people born between 1945 and 1965. Of course, I don't expect you to know that, because if you use that term to refer to people who are clearly younger than that, then sure. But am I from a generation close to the boomers? Yeah, I'm a Generation X, as they called us, Gen X. So there you go. And I'm Jewish. Okay. Whatever. Well, it's pretty relevant. Okay, whatever. We have exactly 0 writings from Jesus. Okay. That's good. Book is full of lies. Whatever. It's a book. None of the 4 Gospels ever talked to Jesus. Right. None of the Gospels were written by people who directly spent time with Jesus. Yep, that's true. Completely explains his opinions and agenda. I don't know what you mean by explains my opinions and agenda, but I just learned reality and learned my religion. My religion believes in questioning everything. Christianity, like other religions, believes in faith. Judaism doesn't really believe in faith. Whenever people say, "Are you a member of the Jewish faith?" my answer is always no, because there is no such thing as faith in Judaism. Judaism, a big part of the religion, is all about questioning everything, debating everything. That's why we have these schools called yeshivas, where people study, learn, and debate the Torah. Right? That's not a thing in Christianity or Islam where you sit around systematically as a people and learn, study, learn, and debate the New Testament as a systematic part of your educational core. Now, you can say, what are you talking about? In Christian schools, we debate the book all the time. Well, yes and no. You may debate some points of it, but there are some things you are required to accept on faith. And that's just not a thing in Judaism. In Judaism, we literally question every single thing in the Torah. We ask, why this, why that, how this, you know, where, etc., when, who, you know, what for. All these things were questions like any good reporter would ask, if they're a good reporter, right? That's what, or a good journalist, that's what every single Jew who learns in a yeshiva is basically taught to do, is to learn how to debate the Torah, because we want to have we want to raise human consciousness. If we're yeshiva people, people who are, you know, Jewish and traditional, even if we're not yeshiva people, but our purpose, one of our main purposes as a people and as a religion, is to raise the level of consciousness of humanity at a religious level, in order to essentially raise the quality of mankind. Right? It's one of the things that we aspire to do as a people. So, yeah, that's one of the things that you should know about. Completely explain. Anyway, Jesus' agenda was simple: live your life, don't harm the creation, but look at everyone go. Yeah, no, that's true. That is one of the. That's why I think some of the lessons in the Christian Bible, or the New Testament, as it's called, are perfectly wonderful and, you know, great. They're great lessons. I absolutely think there are good lessons in there, even if I disagree with some of the other lessons taught in that book. Love your neighbors was in the Torah. Yeah, absolutely. Love your neighbors was, and it's it's one of the commandments, right? Absolutely, love thy neighbor is a commandment, right? It's one of the 10 commandments, in fact, right? Love thy neighbor as thy love thyself. It's a very important commandment. But Jesus also taught the lesson of spreading peace and love, right? And even love those who don't necessarily love you, right? So, absolutely, Jesus taught that lesson in that book. Again, whether you believe that Jesus was a real person or not, to me, that's moot. There's a character in a book called Jesus who taught that lesson. You can believe that character was real. You can believe that character was not real, but that character still taught those lessons in that book, right? And that's what matters. People believe he's real is what matters. It doesn't matter if he was actually real or not, right? So that's what I mean by it doesn't matter to me. I know it matters to Christians that they believe he's real, but to me, it doesn't matter. To me, I see the value of the lesson as more important than whether or not he was a physical, material being. It's irrelevant to me. Was there a good lesson imparted by that book? Yes, great, wonderful. I can accept that. I think that's great. I can respect that. I think that's great. I don't have to be a Christian to think, hey, this guy said some smart stuff, right? I don't have to be a physicist to know, hey, Einstein came up with some great theories. You know, I don't have to be Jacques Cousteau to understand, hey, he invented pretty cool stuff like scuba diving and documenting what was he doing when he was scuba diving, right? I can still appreciate the actions and achievements of people, even if I'm not in the same boat as them. Not to make a pun about Cousteau, but yeah. So that's a little bit about what I think about those things. Let me see if there's more here, information for me to answer, because I see a lot more stuff here is piling on here. Let me go back about it. You still talking about something? Yes, I'm still talking about things. Without lies, Islam dies. I mean, again, you want to interpret a religion with a buzzword phrase? You know, sure, go ahead. But and people do it all the time. I personally don't agree 100% with that, because not everything about Islam is objectionable necessarily, right? Yes, there are a lot of objectionable things in the religion that are to me objectionable. Yeah, it doesn't mean they're objectionable to you or to other people. Although to you it sounds like you find a lot of it objectionable, if not all of it. But again, you got to remember the Quran is largely a bunch of stories. If you want to look at it from a perspective of somebody who's not doesn't call himself a Muslim, doesn't believe in the Islamic faith or the Quran as like holy scripture, Islam is a collection of stories from the Torah, rewritten, updated, changed some facts, right, or changed some of the characters' actions, etc. There's a lot of characters in the Quran, obviously, who are Jewish. They're in the Old Testament. They're in the Torah, right? They're in the books of Moses, and they were just reinterpreted. Israel, also known as Jacob or Yaakov, is Yaqub, and also a prophet in the Quran, just as he is to the people of Israel. But there's different actions that certain people in the Quran are declared to have done, and certain outcomes that are declared to have happened that are different than what happened in the Torah, right? So we're not 100% compatible in that sense, but you have to understand the basis, the references of where those stories came from. They came from the Jewish Torah. And why? Well, because Muhammad initially was writing the Quran, and one of his first marketing ploys was to try to convince Jews in Medina to become his first followers, or among his first followers. And he thought he was finding great success, and he kept writing about Jews in a positive way until they formally said, thanks, but no thanks. We don't want to be Muslims. We don't want to submit to your version of God, right? We want to keep being Jewish. Medina was a Jewish city at the time, meaning the majority of the population of people in Medina were Jews. That is a historical fact. Even Muslims do not deny that. And then after the Jews rejected Islam formally, the Jews of Medina specifically rejected Muhammad's offering to become Muslims. Then he went on the warpath against them. And from that point on, everything he wrote in the Quran, or everything his scribes wrote, actually, because he was illiterate, he couldn't write, everything his scribes wrote that he spoke to them and said, this is the word that God said to me. And for whatever reason, they believed him, and they wrote it down as if it was the word of God. From that point forward, he was extremely aggressive towards Jews. And he wrote all the hateful things he wrote about Jews, kill them wherever they hide behind the trees, and a rock will speak to you, the trees will shout out, all this nonsense that they say, right? So be careful when you say things like what you just wrote there, because it's an easy way to misinterpret things. Not everything about Islam is necessarily negative or lies. Some of it may be incorrect, some of it maybe you can say is lies, but it doesn't necessarily make it so. But it doesn't necessarily make it right or good, even if it isn't lies. Right? There's a lot of problems with the Quran, in my opinion, my belief. But that isn't to say that everything in it is just lies, or that without lies Islam dies. That's nonsense. If you took out all the lies, or what I perceive to be lies from the Quran, you'd have a reformed version of it, because that's what it would be. And by the way, if you left in all the lies and took out all the things that are not lies, it would also be a reformed version. Wouldn't be necessarily a good reform, right? Could be potentially awful, but it would still be a reform if you were changing the nature of the text, which is, according to its firmest believers, an unchangeable text. Even though itself, it has been changed many times. If you look at different Sunni and Shia versions of the Quran, they are not identical. I don't care what you tell me. And if you say, well, they're not real Muslims. Okay, well, they all consider themselves to be. So it goes against your argument. And also different versions of Sunni texts, different versions of Shia texts. Oh, no, they're identical. They're all identical. No, they're not. There are many different derivations of the Quran. is normative Judaism keep Shabbat by not violating it in 39 categories of this. Okay. You guys are really into the religion talk here, huh? I was talking about Trump here at the beginning of this video, and you guys went straight into the religion aspect, which is fine. If you guys prefer talking about that, we can definitely do that. Not okay. Okay. Boy, how far back am I? Jeez. Wow. Oh my goodness. Okay. A lot of things to get through here. Well, of course, the Jew automatically assumes he knows better. No, I don't assume anything. Maybe you're talking to other people in the chat. The oh so you billions, the whole lot of you are being conquered again by 7 million Jews. Yeah, it is kind of ridiculous that, you know, a nation of 7 million Jews and out of a global nation of 15 million or so Jews, 16 million, whatever the number is, Jews, is somehow in control of the rest of the planet, or even 2 billion Muslims, or, you know, 2.4 billion Christians, or, you know, 3 billion other, right? Like, it's patently absurd to think that 15 million, 16 million people on the planet. I mean, it's just absurd. Christians own half of the wealth, more than half of the wealth on the planet. That's measurable. We know that. So how are Jews controlling the world if the Christians own most of the wealth? How are Jews controlling the world if most of the very wealthiest families on the planet are not Jewish? How are the Jews controlling the world if most of the media in the world is not Jewish owned, not controlled by Jews? How are we exactly controlling the world if we're only the 4th largest exporter of weapons, not the top dog? The United States is the top dog. You don't know who the rest are, go look it up. It's not that hard. You know, these claims that Jews are somehow, you know, massively hitting above our weight class and controlling the world, it's patently laughable. I'm sorry to tell you that. I'm sorry to burst your bubble about it, but it's just true. It is patently absurd to suggest that Jews are somehow in charge of the world and all this kind of garbage that anti-Semites love to spread because they're anti-Semites, right? That's literally their purpose. And that's how they view kind of proving their point against, you know, against the Jews, etc. It's just, it's absurd nonsense. That if you learned any history at all, I mean, just look at the number of people who have been anti-Semitic until they learned, and then they stopped hating Jews. I'm not even talking about the ones who converted to Judaism, etc. I'm just talking about the ones who had their eyes opened, their minds opened. They learned a fact or two about history, and then they dug deeper into it, and they saw, you know what? All this hatred that I've had inside of me against Jews is nonsensical. It doesn't even make sense. Anti-Semites say things that are contradictory all the time about Jews. On the one hand, we're weak people. Right? Oh, the weak Jews, they're all weak. On the other hand, we control the world. We have the strongest military in the world, or in the Middle East, or whatever. I mean, how stupid can you be to believe both of those insane things at the same time? Jews are people like everyone else. Some of us are strong, some of us are weak, some of us are average. But overall, as a nation, when we defend ourselves, yeah, we're unified. So that gives us a certain strength. We're very resourceful and improvisational. We're very good at, you know, doing things to survive because we've had to do it for thousands of years. So we're very resourceful in that sense, and we adapt very quickly to changing scenery, to changing landscapes, to changing realities. That's something that is a very important characteristic of being a successful Jew, successful person who is Jewish, because we've had to adapt to constantly changing landscapes that have been a threat to us since ages and ages and ages, right? One minute, the Romans were kind of friendly with us. The next minute, they were our worst enemy. One minute, the Greeks were kind of friendly with us. The next minute, they were our worst enemy. One minute, the Babylonians were friendly with us. And the next minute, they were our worst enemy. Right? One minute, the Persians didn't like us. The next minute, they were our best friends. You know, it goes back and forth, back and forth. You know, even the Germans, right? The Germans used to have issues with Jews for a long time. Now, overall, Germany is very supportive of Israel. like the people of Germany, not just the government. Same thing you can be said with many countries around the world, right? In fact, most of the countries, certainly in the countries that used to be Christian and are now secular, but they still have a majority Christian population, and even the United States, which was always a secular nation, but dominated by Christian population, has had friendly relations and not friendly relations, sometimes terrible relations with the Jewish people, but for the most part are supportive of Israel today, even though they have said all kinds of terrible, propaganda against Israel that are lie-based propaganda as opposed to truth-based propaganda. And yes, there can be truth-based propaganda, but often propaganda is used to spread lies, but not always. So it is absolutely fair to say that the people of Israel are resourceful and adaptive to changing environments because we've always had to be. Right? That's just the fact, right? So I'm pointing that out to make it clear what the issue is on that matter. Right? There are no 100% truths when it comes to political didactic. Right? There is nothing you can say that is 100% true about that propaganda stuff. A lot of propaganda is based in truth. They take a half truth and expand it into a lie. Right? That's a very common propaganda tactic. Anyway, I wouldn't expect you to know things. Sure, you wouldn't expect me to know things about Israel that are nuanced. I live in Israel. I don't know what you're talking about. I've been here for a long time, so I do know things about Israel. Of course. Anyway, I don't know if you're talking to me or someone else. Anyway, Jews question everything. What is your opinion on whether Moses existed? My opinion on whether Moses existed is very similar to my opinion on whether Jesus existed. It doesn't matter. Right? It matters that the lessons that Moses, the character of Moses in the book, taught are, have the values that they have. And it doesn't matter if he existed or not. To me, it doesn't matter. Yes, of course, I believe he existed from a religious point of view and culturally, etc. We teach each other that he certainly existed. And sure, I can say, sure, he probably existed. But archaeologists will say there's no evidence, etc. Okay, that's fine. And I have no, I don't need to prove that he existed to appreciate the value of the lessons taught by Moses, the character in the book, in the books of Moses, right? There is no need for me to do that, to still believe the values taught in that book, right? I do you think it's wrong to kill people like in cold blood? Do you think it's wrong to cheat against your spouse? Do you think it's wrong to have affairs with your neighbor's wife? Do you think it's a good thing to love thy neighbor as I love thyself? Do you think it's a good thing to honor your parents? Do you think it's a good thing to honor, the Shabbat or whatever religion you believe in, to honor something that's holy to you, and to appreciate people worked every day. There was no days off. There was no vacation. Shabbat is literally the concept of vacation being invented, which the French, by the way, later formalized thousands and thousands of years later. Vacation, les vacances, right? And the summer vacations. That is a French invention. Anybody can say whatever they want about it, but that's exactly what it was. And they invented the French concept of vacation. Was a minimum of 2 weeks off for the workers who had better means, took longer vacations of a month or two. That is a French invention. Funny how he skipped over my quote. I didn't skip over anything. Quotes from the Talmud. You didn't see any quotes from the Talmud. We're all Jacobians. Okay. Ever heard of the color? Okay. Thank God for making an atheist. Okay, well, there you go. Moses' prophecy is one of Maimonides' principles of faith. Sure. Do you know the Amish girl excommunicated? I'm sure many people have been excommunicated, whether from being Amish or anything else. It kind of doesn't really matter. Um, wow, look at the time fly. I really got to get going here, folks. Um, don't want to skip your questions, though. Medical industry is Jewish. The medical industry is Jewish. No, there's a bunch of Jews in the medical industry, but the medical industry is significantly larger than just Jews. Okay, you know anything about that? I don't think you do. Making a comment like that. Zelensky is a Jew. Of course, Zelensky is Jewish. We know that he's not a religious Jew, but he has Jewish roots, obviously. So what? Yes, he's Jewish. He doesn't deny being Jewish. He's not particularly religious. So what? I love England from Tennessee, USA. I love England too, and I love Tennessee. I've been to Tennessee. What a great state. The great state is Tennessee. Um, yeah, that's gonna wrap it up for now. I appreciate you all being here. If you would do me a huge favor, smash the like and subscribe, and leave a comment and share this video. That'd be great. I'd love to be able to reach more people through these videos we have and these live talks we have on these live streams. Really appreciate it. And yeah, I mean, go check out whatever other videos I have on my channel that aren't necessarily live streams if you want. The more recent ones, I put up a couple of different debates with people I had on Omegle, etc. You might enjoy those. Maybe you'll hate it. Maybe you'll like it. Maybe somewhere in between. I don't know. But go do that. And until the next time we speak on this live stream or in another video, I look forward to seeing you then. And I wish you all the very best. Nothing but love and peace and happiness and prosperity and a long life and goodness. So that's it from Israel. Shalom.